Critics always hate the films we think are great, but only one appreciates them all. He serves us every day, he keeps the trolls at bay, though he may be a shade delusional. The shelter of his mouth is moist, he will not give you any choice. Agree with him or else, because he is the film defender.
You wanted to be the hero. Now you gotta pay the price.
Alright, I've been tracking the aggressor for a while now. Haven't even had time to shave, so... But I think I finally got him. He's cornered against a tree. I'm gonna finally convince him to be in another video. Oh crap! I think he noticed me. Alright, let's go. Alright, aggressor. It's been a long couple of months chasing you. I presume you know why I'm here.
You'll never get another defense out of me.
What's with the Russian accent? The bad Russian accent. Like,
Really
bad.
I will do a defense on one condition.
Okay.
You let me aggress again.
Well, alright.
Welcome to episode 19 of the Film Defender, serving the public good one underrated movie at a time. And today, I'm coming to the defense of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, unlike this guy, who thinks he can find some problems with it. We're actually filming this days after the new Spider-Man Homecoming trailer came out, which was awesome, by the way. So it's perfectly fitting that we should talk about the most maligned film in Spidey's history.
Meh.
Don't listen to him. You can never trust a guy in a mouth mask. However, as this film does create some strong negative emotions from people on the internet, we figured we'd bring in the Film Aggressor to represent the detractors' point of view. This is going to be sort of a more unscripted type of debate show, but I'll still be defending it to the death as usual. So with that in mind, let's...
Hang on. To the death? Isn't that a little bit aggressive? Yeah, you.
Things are getting heated and they can't agree. Film mediator comes to referee. So watch your mouth, or else I call it
Let's try and keep it a little civil if we can. I'm gonna make sure of that, okay?
Alright.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
takes the fun out of it.
He did kick me.
That was before. He wasn't even here for that. Anyway.
Sure. We're gonna set out some ground rules first to make sure everything stays highbrow. Because that's what kind of video we make. Since the aggressor has laid out some conditions, we're gonna allow him to make his point, and then the defender, in a very civil manner, can respond.
Okay, let's go ahead and get into Objection number 1.
There are so many villains, and they are way too goofy to be taken seriously. Didn't they learn anything from Spider-Man 3? You think they would have. When doing an ensemble film, it's really easy to do it with heroes because you can all unite under one goal or one purpose. When you're doing an ensemble film with multiple villains, it's a little more difficult because they all have their own little things that drive them into their own purposes. Right?
A fair point.
Alright.
Please continue, Film Defender.
Okay, so you bring up the point with heroes getting together versus villains getting together. And even in the case with the Avengers, they all have different reasons for being on Earth. They even have to explain away Thor being there as, oh, Odin just summoned some dark energy. So how is that any more convoluted than a couple of villains that are actually there because they're all somehow tied to Oscorp, which is a really good unifying story point. And beyond that, they all have their own interactions with Spider-Man. And so Spider-Man is their other unifying force. Like for the Avengers, they unify to fight Loki. It's just an opposite thing, but it's the same motivations. So I don't see how that's a valid argument.
The only thing I remember about the film is when
Spoiler alert!
Gwen Stacy is killed, and I remember the Green Goblin killed her. But I don't remember anything else. I don't remember any other Electro moment, and I think Rhino was in the movie for a total of 2 minutes.
Defender?
Okay, as far as the Rhino goes, he was never meant to be a main villain, and so when people say that there are so many villains in this movie, you can't count the Rhino in there. He's a cameo. That's like saying that the Collector is another villain in Thor 2 because he shows up in the post-credit scene. But he's not really a villain in that movie. He's not even really in that movie. He's a setup for later films. And that's exactly what the Rhino was too. Just because you see the octopus arms in Oscorp doesn't mean that Dr. Octopus was also a villain in this movie.
Yeah, he was.
You gonna do something about that?
He has a point. Please don't interrupt.
So, as for the forgettable characters, I don't know how you can forget about Electro. He's probably the most powerful villain we've ever seen in a Spider-Man movie. There were moments when I watched it that I was like, I don't know how Spider-Man's gonna beat this guy. And that's exactly what you want out of a villain.
A lot of people have made the comparison between Edward Nygma and Max Dillon being nearly the same character. They basically have the same origin story, kind of like an outcast, kind of a weird guy around the office who then is exposed to some weird moment in his life that changes into a weird direction for the whole film.
Granted, like, he's a little bit goofy at first, but I actually think that they show a character who's got some mental health issues and is really lonely and nobody sees him, and his sudden exposure to something like what happened in that tank of electric eels. I think they showed that in a really interesting way, and I kind of bought his character motivation, so I actually think these villains are pretty strong.
Alright, also good point, Defender. Let's have a very quick... Hey, let's keep it civil. I saw that. I'm watching you two. Alright, gentlemen, those are fine points. Let's have a quick wrap-up round with, let's say, a 20-second limit. Aggressor?
The characters are not deep. There's really no
10 seconds.
depth to the characters. They're forgettable, and they have no driving force other than wanting to kill Spider-Man.
Time. Defender? Your response?
My response to that is that the characters are not forgettable. They're super powerful. They have intricate ties to Spider-Man and Peter Parker, which makes them much more interesting. Plus, they hint at future story points that are about to come.
Time. Well said, Film Defender. Sounds like it's time to move on to...
Objection number 2.
So, can we talk about this whole Project Roosevelt thing? Why is this so important?
Well, Aggressor, this is your point. Please proceed.
Thank you. I have the floor. So yeah, Project Roosevelt. It was there.
Well, Defender, sounds like the Aggressor has made his point. Do you want to fill us in on the Project Roosevelt?
I would love to. I don't see why this is so hard for people to understand. Project Roosevelt is basically just wrapping up the dad storyline from the past movie, which is something that we haven't seen in any other previous Spider-Man films. So what they wanted to do here, because there were so many complaints in the first movie about this father storyline being stretched out and never resolved in that initial film, is that they wanted to finally address it, have Peter come to terms with what his father did, and put that to rest so that they could move on with the story. And I think that's a really good impulse that a lot of films could probably benefit from emulating.
Good explanation. Do you have an argument, Aggressor?
I do. To your point of this being kind of a callback to the first movie, yes, they did call back, but it was poorly done. It wasn't done. It was convoluted. The story was thrown together, especially the mystery behind everything. It was so easy to figure out from the get-go. I don't understand why it took Peter Parker so long to figure out this whole mystery, and then to do it in such a cliche fashion with yarn and newspaper clippings and a terrible song in the background. Why they had to throw that in the very end there while he was figuring out the mystery. It was just done poorly.
Let's round out our arguments, gentlemen. Let's give you a 30-second response to that.
The part that you're talking about really comes in the middle of the movie. That's not where he actually figures out the answer to the problem. It's where he just starts kind of trying to piece things together. It's later on when he comes up with the ultimate answer to the question. But as far as it being done poorly, I think that it is effective in the way that it's done. Whether it's poor or not is sort of up to your subjective opinion. But as for what it accomplishes, it lets Peter know that his parents were actually good people, that they left him for a good reason, and that resolves that emotional conflict that we have had ever since the first movie.
That was a little bit over 30 seconds, but thank you for that. Penalty. Fairly ambiguous scoring and penalty system here, so just go with it. 30 seconds for you as well, Aggressor.
So even though this was put together and put in the movie and maybe done well to some other people's opinion, it wasn't in the right places. It was done in moments of the movie that didn't seem to fit, almost. It was out of place. It just wasn't done well. And I get that it resolved a lot of emotional things for Peter Parker, but we could have done that in a different way as well.
Well said, Aggressor. We'll take your arguments into account, but I believe it's time to move on to our next objection.
Objection number 3.
This romantic drama is so contrived, Peter has no valid reason not to date Gwen Stacy.
Well, Aggressor, will you start us off this one?
I would love to. When having a relationship as a hero, it can be difficult if you don't have a secret identity. But Peter Parker has a secret identity. So it shouldn't even interfere with him dating Gwen Stacy. I understand the whole drama of obeying her father's dying wish. He should still have the opportunity to date who he wants to date. And if she wants to date him, it should be happening.
That was quite the feel-good argument for romance. Thank you, Aggressor. What say you, Defender?
Well, I think the whole point of it is that they do want to date each other, but that's the problem, is that because he's constantly being threatened by people, by supervillains, who want nothing more than to undermine Spider-Man, regardless of whether or not he has a secret identity, they're going to find out who he spends his time with, especially in this day and age. There are cameras everywhere. And for somebody like at Oscorp, who has access to a lot of that technology, it's going to be tough to keep his secret identity a secret for long. But as for his promise, I don't think that that's necessarily something that he should go back on. And seeing the father show up in these different parts of the movie tells us that Peter is obviously regretting his decision, that he feels guilt. He knows that if something were to happen to Gwen, that it would be his fault. And so he doesn't want that on his conscience. And even though he doesn't want to live without Gwen, that's the sacrifice that he's making to be Spider-Man.
This sounds like quite the inner battle for Peter Parker.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Well, let's have our finishing arguments then. Aggressor, start us off. 30 seconds.
So when we have Peter Parker struggling to figure out his identity, how he's going to be Peter Parker and Spider-Man, it makes me think a lot of Bruce Wayne. You had mentioned that he's in the spotlight a lot. Bruce Wayne, he's constantly in the spotlight as the CEO of a company. So I get that, yeah, he's Spider-Man, always has supervillains coming after him, and he's kind of in public a lot. But he should and still should be able to have his private life.
Good point. Let's keep our comments to 30 seconds, please. Defender, what say you?
Well, the Batman argument is invalid in my opinion. Bruce Wayne is always out in the public, but nobody ever sees Batman. That's part of his mystique. With Spider-Man, he's constantly in the spotlight, and Peter Parker is just a nobody that nobody would really suspect as being Spider-Man. So I think that it's less of an ego trip as for Bruce Wayne's case. And Bruce Wayne doesn't have anybody he cares about anyway besides Alfred. But Spider-Man actually has an aunt and a girlfriend and people that he loves in his life, and he's experienced loss as well, and he doesn't want that
A little bit long-winded there,
be
Defender.
on his conscience.
Thank you. Again, let's keep it to 30 seconds, gentlemen. And with that, let's move on to our following... Hey!
Objection number 4.
Gwen Stacy's death is completely meaningless. In fact, it's all Peter's fault.
Well, Defender, start us off, will you?
Okay, I definitely disagree that this is all Peter's fault. He was the one that wanted to give some separation between the two of them to honor her father's wishes, whereas she was like, I can take care of myself. She actually says,
Guess what? Nobody makes my decisions for me. All right? Nobody. This is my choice.
if it were up to him, he would have gone through that sacrifice to keep her safe. And then to say that her death is meaningless is completely wrong as well, because they build toward that moment throughout the whole movie. They show in her valedictorian speech that she's sort of dedicating that speech to her father, who had recently passed away, by her saying that life is precious and, you know, that we have to take advantage of the time that we have and be grateful for it. And that is also what ends up kind of comforting Peter at the end of the story when he sees that speech. So I think that it's all about him learning to deal with grief, whether it be with his parents, with his uncle, or with, in this case, the woman that he loves.
A good point, Defender. Have you a response, Aggressor?
I want to make this clear that it was Peter Parker's fault for Gwen Stacy dying. It was totally his fault. He could have easily, being the scientist that he is, come up with some kind of cure for Harry. Instead of leaving a friend out in the cold like he did, finding a cure and also being able to keep his girlfriend in the end. And going off what you said about the valedictorian speech, all that did was just make him feel happy about his choices, as they were bad choices, and ended up killing the love of his life.
Aggressive words from an aggressive man. All right, let's have our closing arguments, gentlemen. Defender, you can go first. 30 seconds, starting now.
So as far as the valedictorian speech thing that you so rudely inserted for some reason, throwing shade, that was something that she wanted him to feel better with. Retroactively, if she could have given that to him as a response, she would have. But as far as Peter somehow coming up with his own way to fix Harry's problem with his own blood, I don't even know if that's possible, because his dad says that the DNA is coded to himself so that it would only work if a spider bit Peter. So, and if you saw his lab when he was trying to figure out the whole power thing, he didn't really have a lot of resources to work with, so it's not really a valid point either.
Bit over 30 seconds there, Defender.
Every time.
Closing argument. Your 30 seconds begins now.
I still hold that it is a valid point, because I don't think a friend should let a friend go to his death, or to some trail of madness that Harry was headed down. And I get that emotionally that's probably what she wanted Peter to feel. But I feel like he used it in a way to like, oh yeah, I still feel better about myself even though I got my girlfriend killed and I left my friend out to cold to fend for himself and then turn into a crazy madman and kill my girlfriend.
Both good arguments.
I think he's on the trail to madness.
I've been there for a while.
Since we had some agreement, we'll let that one fly, but let's keep the personal comments out of this, gentlemen. I believe that means it's time for our final objection.
Objection number 5.
This ending is totally unsatisfying. How did Harry get better? And who is this guy in a hat?
Alright, for our final objection, do you want to start off the arguments, Aggressor?
I would. You know, I agree with that Southernly gentleman. It was something that should have been plugged in as like a post-credit scene that they ended up just kind of wedging at the very end of the movie. There were way too many plot holes that they left open. And no, I know they were going to try and set up for a third movie that just didn't happen because they ended up merging Spider-Man into the MCU, but I still don't understand why they had to drop a man in a hat and why they had to make Harry's character just kind of go back and forth. That just goes back on the whole reason why he needed blood in the first place. It was very contradicting to the whole movie they'd set up, and I feel like we were all ready for the movie to just end. We didn't need anything else.
What's your response, Film Defender?
Well, the man in the hat was actually a post-credit scene from the first movie as well. So they're really just bringing him back to fulfill another part of his storyline that would have been more resolved in a third movie. And as for Harry getting better, I don't think there was ever a possibility of him just knowing that this suit was down there that could heal people in combat. So I don't think that could have been a feasible alternative for him to use throughout the film.
Excuse me, Defender. Aggressor, please keep your uncalled for and disrespectful actions to a minimum.
Alright, I'll try.
Please continue, Defender.
Yeah, so that survival suit, we've seen previously in the movie that it can heal soldiers when they're out in the field. So I can buy that it would help him eventually get better the more he uses it. And that's what kind of stops the progression when he's initially injected with that venom. So to say that this is all just kind of thrown in is sort of misleading.
You're misleading.
Aggressor. We've almost finished this in a respectful manner. Let's see if we can finish it to the end, please. Well, with that being said, let's head into our closing arguments to sum up the film. Aggressor, you've got 15 seconds for a closing argument. Starting now.
So, this movie, it struggles to develop the characters fully, develop the story fully. And then also we have a character who ends up becoming his own worst enemy. The hero actually is the one that we all blame for the death of his girlfriend, and I feel it was unfulfilled.
Statements from the aggressor, defender.
I disagree. I feel like the movie really plays into the emotional aspect of this movie very well. It pays the action enough time and energy. It gives enough attention to the love story and the emotional struggle that Spider-Man has to go through. And it gives us a contained story while also following up on future stories that could follow.
Well said, defender. Well, we've had quite the debate tonight. I've had some good points on both sides. On the one hand, amongst the hubbub of yet another Spider-Man film, the sixth in the series coming out, arguably one of the most anticipated due to its involvement in the MCU, it does cause The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to be somewhat forgotten. That being said, we can't discount Andrew Garfield's performance as a great actor, a new update to the beloved Spider-Man franchise, as well as the individual benefits that this film brings out that the defender has made quite clearly as a point. And due to the arguments presented, I believe we'll have to deem that this film has been successfully defended.
What?
That's the ruling. I'm sorry, aggressor.
It's our policy.
Exactly. You guys better go vote in the comments.
Was I right? I try to be an impartial mediator, but let us know below in the comments.
So given the mediator's ruling, I think it's time to pronounce The Amazing Spider-Man 2's updated status defended. So what did you think of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Whether attacking or defending, join the fight in the comments section below.
Also, is there a movie that you feel deserves a strong defense? Let us know in any of these formats.
Also, don't forget to click this flashing subscribe text so that you don't miss any of our defenses in the future. And until next time,
The defense rests.
Didn't they learn anything from Spider-Man 3? You'd think they would have. Doing a montage villains and film. Oh my gosh.
going to Montageville.
Montageville.